A horse exists, a unicorn does not. Although Heidegger does not elaborate, it is worth pointing out that our simple, straightforward approach is capable of considerable subtlety, which extends far beyond the rational and the logical. For instance, we can believe God exists, or has being. We can believe in the possibility that somewhere in the universe another form of intelligent life exists and has its own form of being. We can even produce probability calculations which seek to measure the likelihood of belief in this form of being turning out to be true. Furthermore, the apparently impossible concept of I, the square root of -1, exists. That is, it has being mathematically, even though it cannot exist as a number. But Heidegger is not satisfied with this. If we are not perplexed at our understanding of the word being, we should be. Why are we not perplexed? First of all, we must reawaken an understanding for the meaning of this question. He plainly states the aim of his treatise, to work out the question of the meaning of being. There is a mystery here, and his intention is to try to see a way through to understanding it. Central to Heidegger's conception of being is the word Dasein. Put simply, Heidegger means here human existence, or as he elaborates, Dasein is the entity which in its being we know as human life. This is the entity which, in the specificity of its being, each one of us is. Dasein is the entity which each one of us finds in the fundamental assertion, I am. Having cleared up this point, Heidegger emphasizes that the being of Dasein is its understanding of its own being. In understanding its own being, it simultaneously understands the being of beings which are other than its own being. At other points he further elaborates the concept of Dasein. Fundamentally, this is contained in the actual meaning of the word itself, Da-Sein. Literally, there, da, being, sein. The essential element of Dasein is thus being there, or being in the world. This is our existence, our mineness. It is the specificity of our being, where we ourselves are. It is the place where subject encounters object. Once again, all this prompts the inevitable question. If talking is talk about something, what is he talking about here? Before dismissing such repetitive verbiage out of hand, it is worth examining what it does in fact say. Compare Heidegger's conclusions with the rational clarity of Descartes' fundamental conclusion concerning the human self. Descartes had argued that it was possible to doubt the existence of everything. The entire world and our apprehension of it might be an illusion, but I cannot doubt that I am thinking. Thus, I think, therefore I am. Despite its apparent transparency, this insight is obscured by its own grammar. Descartes' use of the word I is smuggled in by the nature of the verb to think and the verb to be. If we really doubt everything, we in fact conclude that the concept thinking inevitably implies the concept existing. The I of this thinking and the I of this existing are merely requirements of grammar. On the other hand, Heidegger's Dasein reaches beyond the realm of logic, beyond syntax, into the barely graspable ground of our basic intuition. Here Heidegger's conclusion concerning the fundamental apprehension of our existence is deeper and more undeniable than Descartes'. My fundamental apprehension is not, I think, therefore I am, but of my very being in the world. Admittedly, such a concept has somehow to reach beyond the language that trapped Descartes in its net. Yet whether this requires the obscurities that Heidegger introduced is another matter. Heidegger argued that the question of being had been ignored for so long precisely because it was so obvious, so close to us, that we literally overlooked it. Dasein was too close to be grasped in everyday life, and at the same time lay beyond it. Dasein stood behind our empirical questioning of the world, beyond the reach of science. By concentrating on the question of being, it was possible for us to become totally involved in Dasein, but we could never avoid everyday existence. In the moment of vision, indeed, and often just for that moment, existence can even gain the mastery over the everyday, but it can never extinguish it. Heidegger avowed that the aim of his philosophy was to make each individual approach the question of being as intensely as possible. Yet our understanding of Dasein was inevitably a matter of individual interpretation. This involved unearthing what lay beneath an entire history of misunderstanding. Philosophy had ignored and misinterpreted the question of being. Being did not exist in some higher realm. It was not metaphysical in this sense. This misapprehension had begun with Plato and continued into the Middle Ages. It had persisted through to Husserl and his concept of absolute being, which arose out of a bracketed-out, universally true and pure consciousness. But Dasein is categorically different. Being there is being in the world, not in some metaphysical beyond. This becomes clear when we concentrate upon Dasein. Yet what precisely does become clear here? Heidegger himself was forced to concede defeat at this point. Finding himself in a time of crisis, he felt that we are not, for the present, able to reach a precise answer, some truth about Dasein. He would later express this in a poem. "We are too late for the gods, and too early for being. Being's poem, just begun, is man." For the time being, all we could do was progress toward Dasein. For us, in the present time, the question of being had no answer. The journey was what was important, not the arrival. This was the essential task of thought. So if, for the present, there were no answers, what could thinking about the question of being produce for us? Only continual reformulations of the question of being were possible for us. We could concentrate on the meaning of being, or the truth of being. Alternatively, we could concentrate on the region of being, its location, where it existed, or on the very existence of being. All of these could produce an understanding of being. Heidegger characterized this understanding as disclosedness. This phenomenological method was the letting be seen of what discloses itself. What was disclosed was not immediately apparent, it did not show itself. It was the ground of all that did show itself in the being there. Some may find that what was disclosed was not the only thing here that is not immediately apparent. For many who read Heidegger, it was not immediately apparent what on earth he was talking about. Heidegger himself was fortunately aware of this difficulty and the need to address it. In order to clarify his thinking at this point, he used a characteristically homely rural metaphor. This method of understanding the question of being, he said, was like cutting a clearing in a wood. We clear the thicket of trees and undergrowth so that light can be shed on the ground of the clearing. The German word Lichtung means a clearing, but it also contains the word Licht, which means light. We shed light upon the cleared ground which lies hidden beneath what is immediately apparent. We expose its grounding, which is thus disclosed. But even for Heidegger, there is a difficulty here. When we disclose being that is concealed, we unconceal it. What is unconcealed he calls aletheia. This is the ancient Greek word for truth, but it also means unforgetfulness or unconcealment. Yet according to Heidegger, this very unconcealment produces concealment. How can this be so? By unconcealing, we disclose being in one way, yet at the same time we conceal all its other possibilities. By choosing one disclosure, we close off the other possible disclosures. This explains how being can have a history which is not necessarily a history of progress. What the ancient Greeks disclosed of being has now been lost to us in our technological disclosure of being. Our unconcealment has resulted in a concealment. Here, as in many places, Heidegger's argument goes to the root meaning of words. He relies upon their original meaning to support his argument. But why should the earlier, or ancient, usage of words be in any way superior to modern usage? Heidegger would claim that they have priority. This is true, but only in the strict sense of being prior in time. This can be seen in his use and misuse of the word aletheia. In ancient Greek, this is aletheia, not forgetfulness, or unconcealment. The prefix means not, as in anorexia, meaning literally no appetite. Lethia appears in the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, which according to the ancient myth we must all cross after death. Heidegger argues that the ancient understanding of being has become concealed or forgotten. But implicit in the Greek word aletheia is an entirely erroneous concept of memory. We can even produce probability calculations which seek to measure the likelihood of belief in this form of being turning out to be true. Furthermore, the apparently impossible concept of I, the square root of -1. A horse exists, a unicorn does not. Although Heidegger does not elaborate, it is worth pointing out that our simple, straightforward approach is capable of considerable subtlety, which extends far beyond the rash being we should be. Why are we not perplexed? First of all, we must reawaken an understanding for the meaning of this question. He plainly states the aim of his treatise: to one exists, that is, it has being mathematically, even though it cannot exist as a number. But Heidegger is not satisfied with this. If we are not perplexed at our understanding of the wordinal and the logical, for instance, we can believe God exists or has being. We can believe in the possibility that somewhere in the universe another form of intelligent life exists and has its own form of being.